very special guest. I want to very much thank her that she was able to come today and talk with us about sailing. So without too much introduction, I think a lot of you guys probably already know who Dawn Riley is. So I'm going to bring her up on the screen real quick here, and I'll let her introduce herself. So she'll be coming up in just one moment. Morning, Dawn. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well. It's nice and sunny here in Long Island, Oyster Bay, New York.
So great. Thanks for coming out today. I'm here in Michigan, which is actually your old hometown, right? Mm-hmm. Or home state, I should say.
Yep.
And we do have a fellow sailing singles person with us today that I'm going to bring her on the screen. Her name's Katie. She's going to be part of the interview process today. Really want to thank you for coming out today. It's great for you to do this. Tell you a little bit about our group. It's actually only about 4 months old. Kind of thought, it was something I was sitting around thinking as I am single and sailing, and I was like, it'd be nice to meet some people, talk with them, maybe get people together that have a common interest. And it was kind of a thought kind of between both sailing single-handed a little bit, as well as meeting people that are also single and have a interest in sailing. Where it was going to go when I first started, I had no idea. We're probably just shy of 4,000 members right now in the last 3 months. So that's the kind of the group that you're talking to. But we actually one of the biggest things that was kind of unique is how diverse we are. So we'll probably have a lot of people that just because of sailing will know who you are. We may have some that may not because they don't follow the racing circuits, right? Because we do have people from all around the world. So
okay.
So go ahead and kind of give a bio about yourself, an introduction, and I know you have a video too. Just give me kind of a nod when you want me to bring that in.
Okay. Yeah. So being older means that your bio gets longer and longer. So when I'm coaching the kids at Oakcliff, sometimes it's not a challenge to keep it to one page when they're doing their CV. So I grew up in Michigan. I sailed with our family, or we sailed as a family for a year from Detroit through the Barge Canal to Florida, the Bahamas, the Virgins, Grenada, and back. Also up to Maine in there. Came back. Lance Cruz High School in Harrison Township. I have a house actually in St. Clair Shores, so that east side of Detroit. Michigan State University, and when we came back from the year's cruise, I was really obsessed with racing and sailing, and I needed to get a summer job, so I got a job, which of course I wouldn't have discovered was even a job if I hadn't gone and done the sailing with our family for that year. So I put myself through college at Michigan State. While I discovered that it was a job, I didn't think it was a career, and we had a recession back then, and ended up I ended up with a job in an advertising agency for one day and went back to the sport of sailing, and that was 87. And by 89, I was doing the Whitbread on Maiden, part of the first all-female team. Of course, there's a movie out now, a documentary on it. And then I also wanted to do the America's Cup. And it's so amazing when you're younger. You're like, yep, I'm going to do the America's Cup. I'm going to sail around the world. I'm going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to be a professional skier. I'm going to be in advertising. I'm going to live in New York City. And if you stick around long enough, you get to a lot of those goals. So I came back and tried out for the America Cubed. I was the only female on the team there. In 92 in San Diego, we won with Bill Koch. 1993, 94, there was a mutiny on board a Whitbread boat called Heineken, or it was called the Women's Challenge. And then the sponsor came in and said, if you come on, we'll sponsor it. And if you don't, there'll be a whole team of women stuck in Uruguay, abandoned. So there was like no pressure. And then I did the women's team. I was the team captain of that. And then I did my own America's Cup, America True, CEO, youngest CEO, and only female still. And then 2007, I was the general manager of the French team. And then that leads me out to Oakcliff. So I do have a video that you can show, and I will commentate over it. It covers the first 4 years, just to let people be entertained. And it's amazing. It's a montage. You can roll it whenever. It's a montage that is still relevant after all this time. So let me just there we go. So, and if it's Heineken, that was 93, 94. If it was pink, that was 89, 90, you know, the 80s. It was the Whitbread round the world race. It was a beer. It was a good beer, but any beer that you drink a lot for a whole year, you get tired of. We started in England in the Solent. That was the start of Maiden. The Blue Sails were us. Our starts got better after the first one. That was sailing the IACC boats in San Diego, a fleet race in the harbor, which was an amazing thing. That was the beginning of the town understanding that there was an event called the America's Cup there. We did sail our bathing suits into Fort Lauderdale, which I was mortified with. We did not do that on Heineken-ish. Sailing the IACC boats in San Diego, big waves. Sometimes you just go a little bit nuts out on the ocean or on the race course. We had an amazing amount of coaches between Coleus and Kostecki, and Jobson was involved in the beginning. Spinnakers are about 5,000 square feet. Back then, we try to get them up and down in 13 seconds. That's slow by today's standards, with all of the reverse harken drums and gears. And it's the end of a boom in the Southern Ocean. That's Fisher and Paykel. That's our boat doing a nice broach. That's the horizon in the upper corner. It's Dennis Conner, Stars and Stripes. They didn't like us very much, so we didn't like them. From the top of a mast, about 120 feet up, slamming through waves. That wave was only about 25 feet. Its highest we saw were 50. Icebergs. Wearing safety harnesses. Dennis's mast came down. The French lost their keel, and one Australia sank, prompting the sponsor to have headlines and advertisements in all of their newspapers. Nothing goes down better than a Foster's. Big crowds in Australia and New Zealand, actually in Uruguay as well. There's the women's team in front of the men's team that painted their boat to look like a female. There was an inordinate amount of upwind sailing in a race that's supposed to be downwind around the world. Those were high-tech graphics back in the 80s, 90s. International team, we had to go see Minnie Mouse. Gloria got the kelp off of the rudder, and we gave her some dish soap to wash her hair. Surfing on the Volvo 60s. Susie Leach, now a board member of Oakcliff, did that twice. 2 concussions, about 7 stitches to her face. Maverick checking the rig. And sailing into Auckland, New Zealand. Favorite place on earth to sail.
Great, thank you. That was a great way to do an introduction, and a lot about kind of my favorite sailing history growing up by watching the America's Cup. I will go over a few things. I know I want to talk about Oakcliff, and we'll get into that. I'm going to try to, I think I tried to do it chronologically a little bit, if that's okay. So I'll take you back to old memories first, kind of. So, yeah, being from the Great Lakes, you kind of, if my understanding, cut your teeth probably here on Lake Huron, sailing Port Huron to Mackinac. Is that correct?
Lake St. Clair.
Lake St. Clair? Okay.
Sailing with our family. We went cruising from the time, I guess I don't remember the boat, but the first boat my parents had They called the sieve because it leaked so much. So we sailed as a family. My dad raced. And then when I think my first race was actually when I was 4 or 5, and it was Harbor Springs Regatta on a boat called Leonore 4, way the heck back. And then, yes, I did do Mackinac. I think I was either 14 or 15 when I did my first port here in Mackinac.
So did you start like with laser lightnings like a lot of people do, or
no? Think of again, I've already established them a little bit older, and there was very little junior sailing activity in any of the clubs. My cousins, well, they're fake cousins, Bob and Elle DeClerc, I think were at Crescent, and the only memory I have of junior sailing is that they were sailing Sunfish, I believe. And one got out and swam the boat, and they both got kicked out. They're identical twins because they weren't allowed to get off the boat. But true, there were no rules that said you couldn't swim the boat at that point in the rule book.
Nice. So yeah, that kind of brought my other thoughts when I was going through a lot. I kind of told you off screen last night. I was going to blame you for my sleeplessness because I was doing some brush up history to ask some questions and wound up delving into watching a ton of America's Cup footage last night instead of sleeping. But
racing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, going, well, we'll get to there, but going all the way up to what we're looking at foiling craft now. I mean, you know, from what we were doing in the first, catamaran in the 88. But I was kind of thinking, but it reminded me of, you know, being a Great Lakes sailor to start with. How much did that kind of hinder you going into the international circuit? Did people look at you? I know you had ocean experience because of different things that you were doing non-racing wise, but racing wise, coming from the Great Lakes, did that have any, you know?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. It actually is an advantage. And if you look statistically at some of the better sailors, many of them have come from the Great Lakes. And the thing that's unique there, and we see the same thing at Oakcliff, a lot of our people, as a matter of fact, the police here were giving tickets for speeding or something. And they're like, how many people from Wisconsin do you have there? Because you have to learn how to sail with no wind. You have to learn how to sail with thunderstorms and react quickly. You don't get to sail in the winter because the lake actually freezes, so you become obsessed with it in the summertime. So you end up being able to, I mean, how many times we've been racing and you have boats on opposite legs of the course with the exact same wind, condition. Spinnakers up on, 180-degree wind. So you have to let your mind be bent. The only thing that I can say that I learned outside of the Great Lakes was when I lived in San Francisco, the currents and the tides. That was the only thing that I didn't get a really good, strong background from the Great Lakes.
Okay, yeah, and it's great. That's kind of what I mean. I've always felt growing up, but I'll admit I'm kind of the opposite. I have very little ocean experience. I have some, but not a ton. But I always thought back to whether it's a true story or not. But Ted Turner, when he raced the Chicago to Mac, the famous, somebody's whatever.
No, it's true. It's true.
It is okay. Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was real or not. But for those that may not know the story, it's well, I'll let you tell. Do you know the wording?
No, I don't have it up top of my head, but I just saw it the other day somewhere.
Something along the lines of, somebody warned him that the lake Lake Michigan can turn pretty quick, and he kind of blew him off, whatever, and it's an inland lake, right? And he got hit by one of the worst storms probably we've had in the Chicago to Mac in the 70s, and he was sailing his was it 12-meter? I know it was an America's Cup, but
no, probably, it was the same boat that they did the Fastnet on.
Fastnet on? Okay. So, anyways,
it might have been called Courageous as well.
Yeah, it was Courageous. So it was Kirby, leaned to him in the middle of the storm, supposedly, and asked, what do you think about inland lakes now? And he said, I publicly decry or take back anything I've ever said about inland lake sailing. So,
yep.
So we'll kind of move on from there. And I know I had Katie kind of do some research into both the two areas that one of interest of her is going to be America True. So let's move it up to there. One last thing on the Great Lakes, though, that I wanted to ask you was I was going to just kind of relay the story that one of the first times I reached out to you was when I found out you actually spent time sailing on the Prevailing Winds 2, which was part of a scout system that we have here in the Great Lakes. just 1 or 2 years after you, not many years. I was first mate on that boat, actually. So I spent 4 summers teaching scouts how to sail on the boat. But I guess my kind of question going there after relaying that was, I know you've done a whole ton with trying to get either disadvantaged or youth or whatever out sailing and out on the water. Kind of describe the programs that we had back then, because that was the only boat I knew of in the Great Lakes even that did a program like that when I was on it, to what is available to kids now.
Right. Well, Sea Scouts, as you might imagine, I was very proud of being a part of the Sea Scouts, because back then it was Boy Scouts and it was the only part that girls were allowed. So I was prideful of breaking barriers when I was 13. But like I said, there's a few clubs that had junior sailing. I was at North Star Sail Club. I lived down the street. We weren't members, and somehow I got invited in through high school, and there were 2 people from the East Coast who knew about Sea Scouts, and they started their own ship back then, a Sea Scout ship 147, and we had a boat called Agent Orange. It was a Dufour 27 that was bright, ugly 1970s orange that was donated to us, and we saved up our money and did our fundraising by running the kitchen at North Star, and then went on to the Sea Scout, onto the ship. And I would say out of the people in that experience, there was only maybe 2 of the 14, 15 on any given day that were from the club. They were really reaching out through the schools, so getting people into sailing. And then jumping way ahead to America True, we had something called True Youth. So people, thank God, they forget that in the early 90s, if you didn't belong to a yacht club, you just weren't going into a yacht club. There was very little community sailing. There was very little access. And I knew it was possible. So we did, with America True, we had True Youth, and we had True Ally clubs. So we had 28 different clubs. And the contract was basically, we will fly your burgee on our headstay going out to the America's Cup every day. You will promote us and do some your own internal fundraising for our America's Cup campaign. And I will come and do at least one speech for you at your club. And in exchange for that, you need to do a True Youth Day, which was a way wherever you were with whatever boats you had, whichever equipment, you would reach out into your community and find an underserved population. And that really, at that time, combined with other forces, really blew open the doors of yacht clubs and the idea of what sailing was going to look like for the next 20 years. So that was, one of the most proud things.
Awesome. Well, thank you, for all that you put back into sailing. Not only got out of it, put back in. I'm going to drop myself out of the screen here for a moment. I'm going to let Katie ask some questions. So I know she had some stuff about America True. I may have some questions later. I'll touch back on the subjects, but and I know that she wanted to kind of bring up into from America True to Oakcliff, which is kind of where we wanted to transition. So okay. I'm going to let you 2 talk for a little bit and have the screen, and I'm going to drop out here.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dawn. Thanks for being here. A little bit about me. I'm coming from California, and I first got started sailing with the Girl Scouts in middle school. So I was really excited to see the work that you're doing with the youth. I think one thing you mentioned was that fact that can be inaccessible to a lot of people, because sailing is not inexpensive to do, but it can be. It can be when you
only
have the
one
right
person
community.
has to be wealthy, the boat owner.
Exactly. I'm curious with America True, if you have any stories about what some of the kids who have gone through America True programs, as far as what the yacht clubs have done, if you've been in touch with any kids that have gotten introduced to the sport that way.
We didn't do a very good job. And of course, remember, again, in the 1990s, email was like a bizarre thing. So it'd be much easier to keep track of people. Facebook didn't exist. Hell, when I did the first Whitbread, cell phones didn't exist.
Right.
The second Whitbread, cell phones didn't exist. So we do know that programs have continued. So we've worked with Edgewater Yacht Club in Cleveland. We've worked with Fort Walton Beach. We've worked with Eastport Yacht Club in Annapolis. And then that evolved into the Box of Rain Foundation. So we know that yacht clubs have started programs and they're continuing. One of the more interesting ones was in Lake Lanier in Georgia. And that almost didn't happen when some of the members found out that there were going to be non-white people in their club. And I called bullshit on that and started to walk out the door. They changed. They had the event. It was a huge success. And the parts like you don't know until, way, way later, only about, I don't know. It was something so bizarre and coincidental. Probably 6-7 years ago, I was doing a corporate speech for at a resort on Lake Lanier. And I mentioned, I was like, I was here a long time ago. We did a sailing event. The bus driver, the shuttle driver, was a member of the church that went on that event. And they're still doing it today.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And that's kind of the coolest part. You just do this because it's the right thing to do and you're doing good. And you just have to assume and believe that it's going to continue.
Yeah. So that actually does bring me to another question I wanted to ask you is this. I knew about you because of The Maiden. Really, that's honestly what I knew about you. And doing some research about you, I had never heard of Oakcliff before. I actually went to school in Poughkeepsie, but graduated before Oakcliff even existed. And I'm just curious what it's like for you to have built this amazing, really, I wouldn't even just call it a program. It's just this amazing community, amazing initiative that has really brought out people that have been innovative and competitive and successful in the sailing world. What's that like for you to have built this?
So the first thing is you identified one of our challenges is we're not like anything else, so it's hard to label it.
Right.
We call ourselves a training and coaching center. We're a workforce development site. We are competitive regatta, hosting organization. We are community yacht club, maybe is something to call it. But we're really trying, our slogan is building American leaders through sailing. And I designed it 11 years ago to fill a void between that huge push that we'd seen with community sailing, the kind of corporatization of junior sailing at yacht clubs. So you ended up with all of this like funnel of people that didn't really have anywhere to go. So if you're in a family that you're at a yacht club and you're doing an Olympic campaign and you have all of the funding and all of the coaching, go do that. But if you're a member of a sailing community, yacht club or community sailing or just family, and you don't quite know how to get to the next step, we're essentially the graduate school for any junior sailing, community sailing, and we're, again, job force development.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have, I'm sure there's many people watching who are as unfamiliar with it as I am. So could you take some time to talk about like your sapling and acorn programs and maybe some of the things that are available?
Well, normally, before coronavirus, I could tell you the exact schedule. One of the things that's unique here is that we're able to, because we're pretty flexible and dynamic, and we have a boat shop, which is behind me. We have a yard across the street. We have a little clubhouse classroom. We have a dormitory upstairs, and we have a high-performance beach and access to the water, both for big boats and small boats. And then there's, 5 different significant sized race courses within 10 minutes of the mooring field. So, it's a pretty amazing geographic setup. We have developed different programs. It started and it's evolved. So where we're at right now is we have acorn programs. So think of an oak cliff, an oak tree on a cliff. Acorns are the smaller programs that focus on just one type of sailing or one specialty is probably the best way of saying it. And we have onboard reporting, so OBRs, so journalism. We have foiling. We have inshore, which is match racing. We have offshore, which is clearly offshore. And then high performance, so Olympic type sailing, 49ers, NACRAs, FX. In this October or September, we might have, if everything comes back together, we'll have an event, 2 weeks of training and 2 Triple Crown events, which there's prize grants given out in all 10 Olympic classes for 2024, even though the Olympics now are in 2021. So we're still developing all that. And then we have what's called the Sapling Program, which is the whole gamut. So the saplings come in, they live on site, they are basically like interns and learn how to take an engine apart, rigging. They learn a little bit of everything, so they could be a good project manager or a good boat owner if they're going to go get a real job somewhere else. And then they can specialize. And then the best of the best we hire here, and they work for us for a few years and then inevitably go off and get a job. Like Chris Kennedy's moved to back to Wisconsin, where he's working at Melgis. His wife and its fiance and their dog both left. They all left us, but they have a wonderful farm there, and they're sailing and coaching and working in the business.
Well, and that's what it's about, right? Is sending them out to keep expanding the sailing world. So
we had, I think it was Chris Kennedy actually, that I was like, okay, so he's given us, and that's a great thing. Anybody who runs a business, when your employees give you 6 to 9 month notice, you're like, okay, we can plan for this. And Chris gave us notice that he was going to be moving back in the fall because they found a house that was the right thing, and all this. A board chair said, well, how can we keep him? Can we pay him more? And I was like, first of all, no, we don't have the money. Second of all, no, that's not about the money. And third, this is what we're supposed to do, is send them off into the real world as good human beings.
Right. You've mentioned a few times getting a real job and in the real world, and that definitely resonates with me. And I imagine a lot of people on sailing Facebook groups the same way, as we hear, get a real job, do the real things. And I think so for some of that's a little soul crushing. And I think it sounds like you struggled with, okay, going into advertising, you lasted a day, but you've done something amazing.
I would have stayed there, except for they lost the account.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't my fault.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't. But you've done what I see as, like, when you kind of see yourself looking back on your career so far, you've done something amazing simply by following your passion and not buying into what the world says you're supposed to do. So what advice would you have about just doing what you're good at and what you love?
I think that's right there. Do what you're good at and what you love. But it's not just by accident. It doesn't just happen. So the first thing is that I paid for my own college. Mm-hmm. So, and I learned how I got most of the skills, if not all of the skills that I needed for my career, by figuring out how to be an entrepreneur and pay for my college. Mm-hmm. Right? At university, I did great in art appreciation and science and journalism and advertising, but my dad was in advertising, so I kind of already knew that. So it was, I had picked up some skills, but most of it was figuring out how to get to do what I wanted to do. I also tell people that if you have a goal, just one goal, you're screwed. You need a whole bunch of goals. And then as long as you're it's just like an upwind leg in a race. As long as you're not completely knocked and going backwards, if you're knocked on one side, then you tack and go on to the lifted tack, and you're going to get to the mark eventually faster. Yeah.
Keep moving forward somehow. Oh, that's great. Kind of circling back more specifically, you mentioned the Olympic training, and I was reading about how you basically were really influential in getting the new event, the offshore, the co-ed, double-handed. Yeah. So what was that like to be part of that major addition?
Well, the decision I think it's somewhere on our website. But I first heard about it when Bruno Tremblay talked about doing offshore. He's kind of like the marketing guru. He invented the Louis Vuitton cup, so he's been involved in the America's Cup since the 70s, and truly a marketing guru. Tour de France, à la voile. And he mentioned at a yacht racing forum in Portugal or somewhere, oh, we should have offshore in the Olympics, and we all thought, yeah, he's nuts. And then all of a sudden it was happening, and then it wasn't happening, and then it was happening again. And I happened to be in the World Sailing meeting in Sarasota, Florida, which is the first time that's been in America for like ever. And in the hallways, everybody was pontificating how it was stupid, how it was impossible, how the kids were going to die, how they were going to have sex, and it was going to be, just like ridiculous things. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Torben Grail, and we're like, this is ridiculous. Of course we can do it. And he said, I can do it in J24s. I said, we can do it in Melgis 24s. And then we came back and we did it. So we did the first official, or the first test event for the Olympics in Melgis 24s. And the biggest thing for us was to try to take all of those things that people said you couldn't do. You couldn't cover it in the media. It was going to be expensive. It was going to be dangerous. It was unpredictable. You couldn't have TV around it. And I don't think there was, it was going to be unsafe. We didn't have any issues. We were able to overcome all of those naysayers from things like, it's going to be dangerous. So how are you going to make sure that people are clipped in? Well, we had 24-hour, 2 different cameras going on all of the boats so that we had somebody, mostly me, I think I got less sleep than any of the sailors, at home base, sitting right here watching the live stream of all 6 boats. And if I saw them not clipped in, they were going to be sent home. That was in the notice of race. You were automatically disqualified. Another thing that's relevant for other people is that they said, it's not, you have a protest. It's not like you have umpiring. You have a protest, so you could win the race and TV could go off the air, and 7 hours later, the protest committee could come out and say, no, they're disqualified. So we had an international jury ready to go and do a Zoom conference call. So we tried to be anything that somebody said you can't, we said, oh yeah, watch us, and fixed it.
Well, one of the things I kind of wanted to touch base on too, since it kind of brought up I think you have a habit of proving people when they tell you you can't. So kind of start back. Women in sailing is one of the things I wanted to go back with. How hard was it to forge through and be one of the first women sailors to do the things that you've done? I mean, to break into the the Whitbread, to break into the America's Cup, when it pretty much at that time was a men's club.
Well, first of all, it's hard for everybody, whether you're a man or woman. I also, with my background in marketing, there's no question about it, as I was able to capitalize on being the first. It's easier almost to be the first than the second. Because when you're the second, it's like, oh yeah, somebody already did that. You lose a little bit of that fight. Now that fight was always in me, but that wasn't the main reason why I did any of it. I did it because I wanted to go sailing, I wanted to compete, and I wanted to be a professional, and I wanted to win as many races as I could. But to be totally honest, it's not about winning. It's about the process, and truly is about the moment when you're all working together, all 17 of you, hot and sweaty, and you get the spinnaker in and you inch out in front of the other guy just at that mark rounding, whether you won the race or not. So yeah, it was a little bit difficult. I took advantage of it as much as I could. And now the final frontier is to have equality, where we're not having to even talk about it. I'm the past president of the Women's Sports Foundation, and Billie Jean King's a friend of mine. And she started that, I forgot now, 40 some years ago, with the idea right around when Title IX happened. So in the 70s, with the idea that it would last 5 years until Title IX took effect and we had total equality, and then the foundation would go away. And it's still there and still needed.
So, I doing some, like I said, reading and stuff, just trying to brush up. I came across something that I wanted to ask you about. At one point, I think in an interview, probably when you were about 23 years old. I think your answer was, they asked you if you could sit back and enjoy it. Like, what did you see? And your point was, well, I'm off sailing when, the news is being covered at home, that you've already moved on to the next spot. And you said that you hope that your mother kept a good scrapbook. So my question to you is, did she?
Oh, dear God, has she? She's kept amazing scrapbooks for the whole family. And then we also have, VHS tapes that have been onto DVD, some of that. But one of the coolest things is she kept all of my T-shirts. I'm like, just throw those away. And she made the quilt out of it and gave it to me for my 50th birthday. So it has like, I don't know. It's some random ones. So when in 1989-90, when you won a leg, which we won 3 of the legs, you would get like a god awful colored bright shirt, a yellow or a green or a red with this huge logo of the Beefeater Whitbread trophy. So she cut those out on the pockets.
Nice.
And then I think she has one from a Lake Erie or Put-in-Bay race week in there. And of course the big events.
Yeah. Yeah, Put-in-Bay. I forgot about Put-in-Bay races. I was able to race one when I was in high school years ago. I almost had forgot about Put-in-Bay. And then I've had a chance to do a Port Huron back when I was in the Bay City area, a boat called Dolphin. I'm not sure if you ever remember them racing, but they raced out of
Dark blue.
I'm trying to remember their names. I grew up a powerboater. My dad dad had an Egg Harbor. I switched to sailing in my teens somewhere in there, and I remember the brother had a sailboat named Dolphin out of Bay City Yacht Club.
Okay.
And I forget the people's names now. It's been years ago. That was 17, I think.
Yeah.
Back when I got a chance to race with them. But someday the Chicago hopefully is on my list. But we'll see. I'm going back to the Whitbread. One of the things that I remember reading, if you can kind of tell me a little bit about the time that you guys start. I think you're in the southern Gulf, probably. You were taking on water and had to do mechanical repairs and
on Maiden. Yeah, that's one of the things that in the documentary is crap. Because, and I explained it, but when I explained it to you guys as sailors, you'll understand why the producers just went, yeah, the water was coming in through the mast. Because that is not the case. So I'll try to make it as efficient as possible. I was the diver, the engineer, and a watch captain. So that meant that I was in charge of the engines. And if I had to get something off the rudder, if we were sinking or plug a hole or whatever, and also the water maker. So I was on deck. Pretty intense sailing, way heeled over. Probably the hardest we were going upwind because we're coming along by the Falkland Islands, so we had to make a point. And the Joe came up and said, "There's salt water in the tanks, in the freshwater tanks." I'm like, "Oh crap!" So I just assumed that the last time I'd made water that it wasn't working right. So we pumped all the salt water out. Changed the filters, flushed the filters, then started up this fresh water, and it was sweet water. So we filled up all the tanks. But that was my off watch. So I was kind of half awake, sleeping on the floor as we're pounding through, forward of the mast where the water maker was, wedged in between the water maker and the engine. And then by the time I got that all done, when it's colder out, it takes longer to make water. So I then went on watch for another 4 hours. She went to make tea to get up the next watch, and it was salty again. And I'm like, holy crap. So that's when I started thinking, did we split the hull? Is this salt? Because I was confident the water wasn't coming in through the water maker. I had tested that for 4 hours. So I was trying to figure out where the water could be coming in. I was thinking, and I searched, and we filled it up again. And then I had to go on watch again. So that's 16 hours that I've been awake and sailing and fixing stuff. And I said, I just have to get some sleep. And then, so I wasn't in the process of pumping it out and refilling it. And that's when Tracy's feet got wet. So she thought we were sinking. So then I'm woken up. And as my sister says, you can see my bra. She's like, I saw your bra in the movie. Because I was just like, are you fucking kidding me? I just need some sleep here. And in that process, because we pulled everything up and we were looking, and I'm tracing everything without floorboards, without sails, without any crap. I was watching, and there was a tank, and I'm looking up, and there was a support for the cockpit floor. And I'm like, what the hell is this kind of tube? And what it turned out was it was a vent. There was the tank, and there was a vent to let the air out when you put the water in that was down below. This was an old vent that I wasn't involved in the process, so I didn't know about it, that was going up into a cockpit seat that, because we are so heeled over, was full of salt water. So it was siphoning the salt water into the tank and then out the inside vent into the bilge of the boat. So that's why they didn't put it in the movie, because it's too complicated and there's no way to do that quickly. But yeah.
For a non-sailor, try to figure out what all that meant. I could definitely see why they wouldn't include that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was also looking at doing, came across kind of a short little documentary on, I guess it would have been America, probably would have been Mighty Mary, I believe.
Okay, 95.
And, they were talking about, I forget who they were interviewing, but my guess would be probably one of the grinders, because she made it sound like most of the team didn't have sailing experience, which I know better from who was there. But I kind of think back now that I'm guessing she probably would have been someone like a grinder, and does that kind of go into maybe what we saw with the bicyclists, on the latest
New Zealand. Yeah.
How much has the sport brought other disciplines in throughout the years, have you seen?
At the top level, you do see that. And it was with the women's team, that was what they were most concerned about, was just the pure strength. So we had rowers, bodybuilders, weightlifters, American Gladiator, but it's not unusual. In 1992, we had 3 football players. Art Price, one time I was like, do you even know how to swim? He's like, why? I'm like, because he was like climbing like Spider-Man across the boat. He was just so uncomfortable being on the boat because he had never done it before. And Dennis Conner had people, and Hal and Al. And so there's always been a few at the high level, specifically for their strength. As it turns out with Mighty Mary, the person that we ended up having to add was the experience, and that was Dave Dellenbaugh, because nobody other than myself had ever raced on an America's Cup boat, let alone in an America's Cup race. And all of a sudden we were doing really well and had a chance of going all the way, and we needed the experience. That's what we were lacking.
So this will be the one tough question, I guess I'm gonna throw at you instead of a softball one. Jokingly there. But so the whole idea to bring Dave Dellenbaugh in and the final race, can you kind of, against Dennis Conner, some of the decisions that were made there? I mean, I doing reading, going back, and that was one of the America's Cups I followed closely, and when I was very first getting into following sailboat racing, was a lot of the media put the decision off on him. Some of the last tactician decisions. What really kind of happened there on the water?
Okay, so he was in for the last bit of racing. Right. People don't understand this. Is something we teach at Oakcliff, is that the helmsperson may get all the glory, but the tactician has to be the most experienced and the most talented person on the boat. They have to have seen everything before, because they need to be aware of what's happening. They need to coach the helmsperson how to do what they have to do. Yes, the helmsperson has to execute, but they have to be 2 steps ahead to be able to process it, think through the options, and then communicate. So that is the hardest position, and the position that takes the most experience. I mean, Dennis Conner wouldn't be Dennis Conner without Tom Whidden. It's just a fact. So we were lacking that.
Probable as he is, right?
Yeah, we were lacking that experience. Most of the women, and I'm going to go out, I'm going to say that very likely all of the women who were on the race boat, who were on the A team, were in favor because we were seeing it every single day. There were some women absolutely that were mortified, horrified, because they were in it at that point as much for competition as for the women's power, women's empowerment. But I mean, the ultimate equality is when you're just there to race. And most of the women, if not all of the women that were on the A team in the race boat had transitioned into a competitor, not a female competitor or a male competitor. And the day that we did lose for the second time and ended up with Dennis Conner going on to the America's Cup was super light air, last top mark, 6 minutes ahead. I was standing on the gooseneck looking and saying, I don't see much wind, but if I see anything, it's coming from the shore. And Dave was keen to jibe. He was considering jibing. And the navigator said, no, 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 we're almost pointing at the mark. And we kept going. So it was a female who made the overriding call. If we had jibed, we would have beaten him.
So there was other calls on the boat. It wasn't his call that made it.
The media blamed it on him.
No, that's what I remember reading and hearing.
Yeah, yep.
And I contest that. I mean, even as somebody that doesn't race a lot, I mean, I'm more a pleasure boater, but I do all the around the island races on Mackinac. I was with a friend, and we. In a boat that should not have been leading the whole pack, right? I was tactician. We were leading the whole pack. We were doing under the bridge and back to the island.
Isn't that nerve-wracking? You're like, shit, I'm in front now.
Right.
What do I do?
I'm leading people that I learned to sail from, like Dave Rowe. I don't know if you knew him or not. He was part of the yeah. So I had some fun last year with Dave Rowe, though. I was in a 31, he was in a 36 Cal, and I beat him on the start and was able to nose him up into the wind, but only had to do that because it was Dave. I probably sacrificed a spot or two in the overall race to do that, but but no, leading the whole way. And I came to the end of a wind line, and I said, look, I don't want to tack in the middle of a dead spot. So I called, let's go back towards the bridge. We were heading towards Sheboygan. People from Michigan won't know this, but and the two other boats sailed through that dead spot for the wind that may be on the shore, and they got it. And halfway on my tack back towards the bridge, the wind shifted, and I was almost pointing to the Grand, to sail, and went from first to last in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that happens in any racing, and match racing is a bit different than fleet racing, but so trying to think some of the other questions I wanted to cover. I did have one that came in here that was actually sent in ahead of time, and it was from somebody so Amy Fiddler wanted to know
LOC Scout.
Yep, from way back. She said that she'll be racing, I think, the Port Huron Mac with your parents' boat, she said.
Okay.
But she wanted to know if you have any big races coming in the future.
Hopefully the Mackinacs, actually. We're hoping to be able to be out there. We originally had the Bermuda race. We had 5 boats and up to 105 people going to Bermuda from Oakcliff, but then that all got canceled. Right now, we've been in lockdown for 55 days, so we have all of our equipment ready to go, sanitized, all the Match 40s. We have the classics coming down. Our big boats, our maxi fleet, are all out of the water, and our Far 40s are out of the water at this point. We have our own Oakcliff bubble. It's all, again, on our website under our policy. But our plan is to allow household bubbles locally, or anybody who drove in and wanted to have their own housing, they can go out and sail on a boat, and we will sanitize it in between different people using it with a 24-hour lockdown period and all of that. So we have the ability to get people out on the water. Now, it might not be the biggest priority when you're trying to make money so that you can actually eat. Right. But for some of us, it is super important. And it also, we think, reflects the freedom that sailing is part of the mental health, to get yourself out there and just take a break from the stress. We're looking at integrating and we have a quarantine period for people coming in, and joining the Sapling Program. So then once, if we have enough people in the bubble, then we could conceivably all drive to Port Huron and go race, 20 people on one boat and do the Mackinac race and be totally safe.
Good. So one of the other ones was going back to Oakcliff and I guess talking about Mackinac races. You had maybe I don't know if you have the information, if you can relay it, but you had two of your Oakcliff graduates or students at the time, I'm not sure which it was, sail on an Orma 60 called a Red Egg. Tried to. I was actually one of the timers for that race, so
Okay.
to try to break the record on the Chicago to Mac. I will tell you, just from being in the harbor, must have had a hairy sail because the winds were, I would not have left the harbor in what they were trying to beat the record. And do you have a little bit from that race? Did they tell you a little bit about what?
Well, that was actually Chris Kennedy, who's now in Wisconsin working for Melgis. This is the kind of people that that motivate themselves to get here. We train and then send them out. As I saw Andy Burdick at the Chicago Boat Show, and I said, I have this guy that's given me notice. He's moving back to your hometown. I don't know if you have a job for him or not, but you need to hire him. And he thought I was crazy. And then the next day he came back, he goes, if he's as good as you say he is, we don't have a job, but we will hire him. And he was the one that went on the race or the record run. And he's also a rigger. So he was pretty impressed with they had some mast damage. And so he fully understood what it was that was going on. But I would never place anybody, any of our graduates, on an extreme boat without knowing the people that they were going sailing with and trying to match the skill level needed and make sure that they knew, there's no question in my mind that Chris would keep himself safe first and everybody else safe.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that it wasn't safe out there. I'm just saying it was. I mean,
no, it was on the edge.
It was extreme sailing. I'd put it in that category. So
well, anytime you leave the shore in a boat, there's an element of risk, and it's just a matter of mitigating it and making sure you're prepared and not being stupid,
right,
and or drunk.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And nobody ever drinks on a Mackinac race. So we know that. So.
No, not actually. Not.
No.
We don't.
A lot of people don't. I was. I'm sure you know the parties in between the two races. I guess.
Once you get there,
right.
That's one of the coaching things I probably don't tell the parents is I talk to these guys about, if you go down to do the bucket or you do a regatta, a series, a nude or whatever. I said, you will be the first one at the boat. You will be the last one to leave the boat. You will do your job. You will be professional. You can have 1 or 2 drinks if that is socially acceptable. But you will not be getting crazy. And then the last night, after all of the owners and decision makers have gone home, you can dance on the table.
Right. Yeah. And that's definitely how it was in the Mackinac races. So I'm going to bring Katie back in here too. We've got, I don't know how much time you have left. We scheduled for an hour. We've got about 8-9 minutes left. Make sure we cover anything you have left that we haven't. I know Katie has one more question. So let me bring her in here. She'll be coming up. I do want to let you know, though, if you do any Mackinac races, I have a mooring ball in the harbor, so please stop over and say hi. So,
okay, how big of a mooring ball?
How big of a mooring ball? I actually am the diver on the field at the moment, so I can probably find anything that's down there. But I personally have 2 boats. Unfortunately, I'm trying to get rid of one in the middle of the COVID-19. But I just bought an S211, so that'll be there. And I have a Tanger 28 is what I've been on. So
nice.
Neither one fast.
So, Don, I've intentionally held off on the female sailing questions because I really appreciate what you've said several times is a dream of a future where it doesn't matter if you're a male or female sailor, you're a sailor, you're an athlete, no matter what.
Yep.
I do know, though, that there are quite a few more men still in the sport than women and in this group as well. I'm curious, I've been really grateful to have support of male instructors and be inspired by women seeing them do what I want to do. I'm curious what you might suggest to the men in this group as far as supporting women in the sport.
Okay, so interesting question. The biggest thing is just never say, I think you can. say, of course you can.
Mhm.
And that's how it is here. Unfortunately, women still need to be asked twice, where a guy will fake it, a woman will double, triple check that she knows everything and then question if she can. So that's what we do here is we just say, of course, let's go. Get up there. Doesn't matter what age you are, what gender you are, just get your ass up on the foredeck. Let's go. And because of that, it's unusual for us not to have very close to equality on the water, equity, equality, equal number of men and women. And there was even a couple of fall series ago where we were doing a match race before, and we're at the bar and we're like, oh, you're racing next week and you're racing. And I was like, hey, you guys want to do an all women's FAR 40? It blew 28 and we had an all women's FAR 40. And that year we only had the Curve 50 and one FAR 40 out there, and the Curve 50 had women on it. So we had more women than men out on the race course from Oakcliff, doing really well.
That's
and
amazing.
It was so much fun. Actually, we had 2 FAR 40s. That's right. We had 2 FAR 40s because the other one watched us go down when we came around, put up the masthead spinnaker and 28 knots of wind. And the woman that was driving, she's like, uh-oh. I was like, I got this.
I got this. I like that too. That idea of you can do this. Of course you can do this, and that not questioning. I think that's huge.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, no, I think I think you know, easy way to say it, coming from a man, I don't want to say it wrong, sorry, but I think you've done a tremendous service to getting women into the sport, whether that was your intent or not. I don't know if that was from the beginning or if you just wanted to sail, but I
just wanted to sail.
Right?
I was young and selfish, and of course I just wanted to sail, and that's fine.
Well, over time you've made a great mark in the I think the sailing world. You know, I can tell you coming from a man's perspective. I mean, Katie can tell you from her perspective.
Thank you.
You know, I think, and with the kids too. I mean, everything I've heard you've done with kids and everything
I think
else.
that's the biggest thing is I just want to make sure that people know, and it also bodes well for the survival of our sport if the more people you get involved. The only way you get out of the sport, in my perfect world, is if you're an asshole. Other than that, everybody's welcome.
Yeah, I think there's a few of those that are still in there from what I've heard. I will leave names unsaid. But so is there any, I mean, we got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you still wanted to cover that we didn't touch on?
No, I just, at this point, usually I say, everybody come to Oakcliff tomorrow. So give it 14 days, go into quarantine, then come to Oakcliff. So if you go to the website, you can see there's a virtual tour. When you go over to Oakcliff there's a virtual tour. It's pretty impressive what we've built. We got our PPP loan, so we'll be able to keep the doors open for a couple more months, which is great. And hopefully by then we'll have some safety. I hope that people are staying safe. And that's one thing that, like I said, we went on lockdown early. We used our collective knowledge just as we would prepare for an offshore race. We have, cleansing protocols. We have barriers. We have our masks that are good for athletic use, that you can put an N95 filter in if you need to. We have the discipline as if you went, you don't go to the foredeck without a safety harness. You don't go to the store. You don't leave and get within distance of anybody without a mask on. You wash your hands. This is something we haven't seen forever, and I'm hoping that people are going to be safe. The more that we're all in this together, the quicker we're going to come out and have that freedom and enjoyment of sailing and bringing friends along to go sailing, which is really the most important part.
No, it definitely is. I mean, we unfortunately lost the boat and kind of the program on the island. We were getting youth out, and it wasn't so much of a money thing or anything. It's just if you think of the island, the kids all have to work, right? I mean, so we did kind of lose that program on the island, but there's still a few of us that every time there's a race, we're pounding on the kids' doors to come out, and go with us. So, no, that's great. And I want to thank you for the interview. Katie, did you have any last questions or thoughts?
No, that's it. Thank you for the interview. Thank you for what you're doing for the sailing world. It's just great to see someone doing what I want to do someday. So
just make it happen.
Yeah, that's what I've been learning, especially
our programs are open to 15 and above. The oldest so far is 73. So
Okay.
you're in that age range.
That was the other question. I was curious if there was kind of all across the board. So that's great to know.
Yep,
We can do it at any point in our lives.
absolutely.
So I was kind of scanning to see what questions we had. I'll be honest with you, almost we've had a lot of kind of numbers fluctuating up and down. But the good part, we're in a time slot for that's not the best for everybody today, but they'll be able to watch it afterwards. Almost all of them were pretty much no questions, but just what a great interview it was, and what what a great person you are to do it, and to and to relate those stories and to bring them to us. So we really thank you for that. So
you're welcome. Thanks for reaching out.
yeah, no problem. I just one quick thing. I'm gonna if you'll stay for a minute, I'm gonna drop you off the screen. And then I'm just gonna cover. Oops, sorry, I said. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties on my end. I'm gonna drop you off your screen if you'll stay for a second. I'm just gonna wrap up the video. And then we'll have I have one quick question for you offline, if that's okay.
Okay.
So,
yep.
All right. So I'm gonna drop you guys off, and we'll be wrapping things up. I'll be right back with you.
Great.
And I just wanted to thank everybody for watching today, and know that we are going to have a couple more interviews coming up. We've got some people that are doing sailing channels. I think I have a sail maker that wants to come and talk the difference between racing and cruising sails. So please let me know what you guys want to see, what you like, and hopefully we can get some things. Just keep our minds busy during the COVID-19. And thanks for watching, and thanks again for Dawn for coming and talking to us today.